welcome back. Today I'm going to look at Nostalgia, which is the second from last film in Andrei Tarkovsky's career. So this is another part of the Tarkovsky season, which I've been doing for a bit. This is one of the films I've been avoiding, because it's difficult to talk about. To be honest, most Tarkovsky films are difficult to talk about. I mean, it's just that he's a difficult director. He's oblique in lots of ways, and there's so much of what he does is visual that it's trying to explain it verbally certain things he's actually trying to aim for kind of diminishes the effect of the films. So it is tricky to talk about. And so Nostalgia is one of those films that kind of got a bit lost in the shuffle because it's not as famous as Solaris or Stalker or Andrei Rublev. It's not his final film like The Sacrifice, so obviously that would be a bit important. This is the one that came in between. And this was actually a film he made about basically being an exile from your own country. That's the theme of it. And it's about being in another country with different moralities, different mythologies. And it's like, how do you interpret these mythologies? How do you interpret yourself in this new landscape that isn't quite you? And how do you interpret your homeland via this landscape? So it's a complicated story. And Tarkovsky's not going to take the obvious approach, really. So he's going to take a fantastical approach, but it's also based on realism. So it's not going to be pure realism, but it's not going to be like really fantastical and have unicorns or anything. It's going to be like local superstitions and how that affects you, how the way people think in a life affects you. It's that kind of thing. Is like, are these superstitions real or are they not, or is it just madness? That's the kind of area that Tarkovsky goes into. Even like with Stalker, it's like so much of what was fantastical with that was based on what we expect and what we see as real. Even something like Mirror, which was more autobiographical. I mean, it's not that. It's quite early in the morning. Give me a break. So even that, there was an element of the spiritual in there, but it's not as quite as pronounced as here. But it's also just handled differently. So I mean, Tarkovsky got a reputation of being a director who, after Ivan's childhood, kind of made similar films because he was into his own thing. There was a Tarkovsky style, there was a Tarkovsky set of influences, but he actually made subject matters that were actually quite different from each other. He just had an identifiable set of obsessions, so that it's one of those things that auteurs get, like Antonioni. Every Antonioni film is the same, even though they're not. Like, any auteur gets that rap because it's easy and it's lazy. It ignores all the stuff a director will do with a subject matter because a lot of directors just go straight for the style and the obsession that they understand from previous films. So that's all they'll talk about. And there's always a lot more there. It's more complicated to actually really approach a film on its own level and not try and be smarter than the film. Just try and approach it and make it something that's understandable to people who might want to see it. So Nostalgia is a little bit alienation, but it's not a film about alienation in a kind of Taxi Driver level where it's internal alienation. You can't connect with your world because you're so messed up. This is much more. The internal alienation is actually been caused by external forces. And it's a looking at it, identifying what is the cause of it. And it's a much more humane film than The Taxi Driver, which has an element of paranoia, which is just there, just floats there throughout. It's hell of a man's mind. Here it's much more, people are making their existence hellish by mistakes, but it's much less melodramatic about how they do it. It's just normal life decisions that we all make, and how those things can actually cause dysfunction for you. So the biggest part of the theme, the biggest thing that is out of the ordinary for people is leaving your own country for a very long time. And here it's a research project. The research project's been on for a while, and it's about a poet who's going to this to research a Russian poet from centuries ago who came to Italy and then went back home and committed suicide. So he's now investigating this writer to try and find out a lot more about him. So he's coming from Russia to do this. There's something up with him and his family that we never get. We don't get clarity on. It does feel he's alienated from his family or his country. Like he's a choice. Like there's a sense of he's a choice to either stay here or go back. And there's never stated, but there's a sense of like he is dislocated. He's a dislocated man who doesn't quite know where to go next. He can't find joy in simple things. He's searching for something and he's not even sure what he's searching for. And that's what the film's about. It's the idea of, in a more conventional film, he would know what he's searching for. He's searching for direction. He's searching for this, searching for that. But in this one, because Tarkovsky is a person who's lived a life and who's had all those doubts already, and this searching is taking place well before the film has started. Now they're actually just trying to survive their own headspace because they've already made a shitload of mistakes and they've already see the compromise in life, and they can't be fooled into what's more childish sense of wonder or childish sense of what they expect from people, like romance or having an idealized version of whoever you're into. Like he's interested in his interpreter, and she's very good looking, but he's worn down by life by the time he gets here, so that's a very fraught relationship. And he's not doing anything to try and make it easier. And she's got her own problems. She's trying to work out whether she's really because she's been an independent woman. She's trying to work out whether she's should try and get a family now because she really desires it, or what it would mean to if she doesn't get a family. So she's got her own problems, and dealing with him isn't helping her either. So they're basically two people who are at odds. But there's not going to be like this massive set of fights that are going to be explosive. It's not going to be a Tennessee Williams play. It's just going to be people like butting heads a little bit, but and being frustrated with each other rather than having lots of speeches to each other. It's that kind of feeling to it. Yeah, I sense she can be a bit childish at times, and you see her doing these little game things here or there, but that's just her personality. It's her on the precipice of trying to work out who she is, just as he is, but he's much further along. He's been where she is a while ago, and he's made decisions, and now this is him much later, and he's trying to make sense of his decisions, and he can't make any sense of them. He can't feel any forward momentum. So he's basically trying to figure out the life of a poet who killed himself, which is not a healthy place to be if you're depressed. Of course, he thinks because he's in a down period, this will make him much more understanding to this guy. But all it is really doing is it's really just making the situation worse because he's feeding on the depression of this other person, this dislocation of this person who fell in love and turned out the person he was fell in love with wasn't worthy of him and was it his own delusions in the first place, and the poet is seemingly scared to move in any direction without ever trying to look scared. Until he runs into this madman who's on the streets, who's been in an asylum, who now lives in this rotted place, and he's saying he's been trying to walk across this water thing, this spa thing, with a candle. And there's an ancient proverb about that. It's I think it's the end of the world or something like that. But it's a personal meaning for him. And basically, as the film goes on, you realise this guy is just as burnt out as a poet. He's just as fed up with the world. And he kind of wants to destroy himself. And he's angry the way people are living their lives. It's so modern, people going around in cars and having very kind of, they take everything in, but they don't take everything in because it's such a fast life. And that's basically what the poet is doing. He's investigating this character. He's visiting the places the guy went to, but he's not really investigating that much. He's ultimately projecting onto the guy, ultimately, which is what you feel a lot of like biographers do. Like a lot of time when you read biographies, there is always a sense that you're getting some information on the person you're reading about, but there's also going to be lots of information about the person who's writing. Like, they'll focus on certain elements of the person rather than other elements, and it becomes a projection of them in some ways. And that's what this poet is doing, who's in Italy. And there is just a sense of he is disengaged from himself and he can't really face himself, he can't really figure a way to interpret himself in a healthy way. So he's doing it through this other person who he didn't really know. It's just like, it's not really a healthy way to deal with it. But his promise with his family, obviously this is an escape from them, but it's also makes him miss them even more. So the family's almost a metaphor for Russia, even though, even unlike Tarkovsky left Russia because he didn't get any freedoms. He could not go back. This guy can go back, but obviously there's a problem with his family, and he cannot go. He's pulling back to them, so it's almost like they have a metaphor for Russia. But there's also a suggestion Russia is frustrating to him, like it's not what he wants it to be. It's not what he feels it should be. It's just this state that's not quite what he wants from it. His homeland feels like corrupted. And that's what's causing him a lot of grief, but it's also his life and it's his own decisions around it is causing him grief. So he can't quite work out where to go with his life. And that's where the metaphorical stuff comes in, with the guy, the madman trying to walk across this river as a sign of faith with this candle. And the final sections are really is about the poet promising this guy he'll try and do it because the guy doing it always gets kicked out of the place because the people, the tourists there don't want him there doing that because he's just this homeless guy. So the poet promised to do it himself, and it's kind of a reawakening of the spiritual life because at the start of the film we see him going to locations and not going inside them. Like he's distanced from them emotionally, and this is him trying to make sense of the emotion of a situation, even if it seems mad. It's him trying to re-engage with his own emotions, and you get a sense he's trying to face up to himself, but he's finding it very difficult. I'm not going to say what happens when he's doing this. It's a terrific sequence, but it's something you'd well, most of the film's not about plot. I mean, it's just what I've described. It's my guy facing himself. So it's not really about plotting. The plotting doesn't matter for most of it. It's just the atmosphere, the sense of a person in the landscape, trying to make sense of his life, trying to make sense of where he is, who he is. Tarkovsky is very good into much more mythical archetypes as he goes on in his career, and as he goes on in certain films, like the mythical archetypes actually have some meaning to him. Like religion has some meaning to him, like the human archetypes that we all cling to have meaning to him. But he tries to interpret them from his direction, from someone who's a grown man who is trying to make sense of the mythology of human life, even its irrationalities. So that's where he's coming from with this. So it becomes a complicated element, but it's also a beautiful thing because Tarkovsky is a very visual director. So much of the film is not just about one thing. It's usually covering quite a few things in some shot to shot, but it's there. It's always there. The sense of engaging with something that is hard to define one way. So it's like creating different sets of images, different sets of movement images to create a feeling, and you're meant to rewatch someone try and figure your own way around them. Sort of like what the guys try to do with the poet, you're meant to be doing with him. Or at least that's my interpretation. So Nostalgia is just wonderful. I don't want to try and go into too much more detail. I think I've explained what interests me about it, my fascination with it. I saw this in the cinema when when it was re-released in the GFT, and then I watched it with a projector recently. So I have been watching the big screen, and it is beautiful. And you really have to see it in the big screen. It loses so much in pacing in the small screen. It just does, you don't really see the effect in the small screen with this one. You really see the biggest screen possible. So this one is a beautiful film. It is still good in the small screen, but it's not the same thing. It's really not the same thing. You're not getting a full. It's one of those films you're not getting a full experience unless you see it on a big screen. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope this encourages you to go and see Nostalgia, because it is beautiful. It is just wonderfully complicated and difficult, but in a very good way. So even though the pacing might cause some people struggle, stick with it, because it all makes sense and it all builds to something. It's not slow pacing for the sake of slow pacing. There is a kind of build that keeps on rewarding you for sticking with it, because it's trying to get you in a mood. So I would say stick with it. It's not trying to hold your hand. Right. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll be back soon with some more. But that's me for now. Right. Bye.